Team USA camp isn't where chaos happens. It's where order is confirmed. Roles are tested, not rewritten. The expectation going in was simple, clean practices, professional reps, and quiet confidence from players who already knew where they stood. Nothing explosive, nothing uncomfortable, definitely nothing that would spill outside those gym doors. But that's not what happened. Because somewhere between the final drills and the last closed-door scrimmage, the atmosphere changed. And it didn't change loudly. There were no arguments, no shouting matches, no viral moments for cameras to catch. In fact, most people watching from the outside never saw it at all. The real story unfolded off-camera in the pauses between possessions, in the way eyes followed one player and slowly stopped tracking another. By the final day, something irreversible had occurred. One presence had reorganized the room, not through words, not through demands, through control, through timing, through the quiet authority of a game that suddenly ran cleaner, faster, and more decisively in one direction. And when camp ended, one player didn't wait for explanations or announcements. She simply stepped away. No scene, no statement, just a walkout that told everyone inside exactly what had changed and why this camp would never be remembered as routine again. Team USA camp is designed to eliminate surprises. That's the entire point of it. By the time players arrive, most of the hierarchy is already understood. Coaches aren't looking to reinvent the team, they're confirming what they believe they already know. Veterans walk in with an unspoken security. Rookies arrive hopeful but realistic. The structure is clear before the first whistle even blows. Practices usually reflect that order. Drills are efficient, conversations are short, and nothing feels rushed or chaotic. There's a quiet professionalism in the gym. Everyone knows when to speak, when to listen, and when to simply do their job. No one is trying to take something that isn't already theirs. That's why camp rarely produces drama. It's about fine-tuning, not reshuffling. This particular camp followed that expectation. On paper, the roles looked set. The stars were known. The leaders had already been labeled long before anyone stepped onto the floor. Veterans moved through warm-ups with ease, comfortable in their space, confident that their place wasn't under threat. There was no sense of urgency, no tension hanging in the air. And that comfort extended to the coaches as well. They weren't searching for answers. They were confirming them. The rotation felt stable. The system felt familiar. This was supposed to be routine, another checkpoint on the way to international competition, not a crossroads. That's what made what happened next so unsettling, because the calm wasn't broken by an argument or a mistake. It didn't come from ego or confrontation. It came from execution, from pace, from decisions that quietly forced everyone in the building to reassess what they thought they already knew. And that calm, it didn't survive the first few drills. Caitlin Clark didn't arrive with noise. There were no cameras tracking her entrance, no speeches, no need to announce herself. She walked in like someone who understood the environment and didn't feel the urge to disrupt it. That alone kept her off the radar at first. In a room full of established names, she blended in until the ball found her hands. That's when the energy shifted. Not dramatically, not all at once. It was subtle, almost easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. The pace of the drill changed. Passes came a half second earlier. Cuts became sharper. Spacing adjusted without instruction. Players didn't look to her for validation. They reacted to her decisions. The offense began to organize itself around her reads, not because anyone told it to, but because it made everything cleaner. She wasn't taking more shots. She wasn't calling for the ball. Yet possessions felt heavier when she initiated them. Coaches leaned forward. Teammates stayed ready. Every movement started to feel connected, like the floor had suddenly shrunk and everyone needed to be precise. This wasn't dominance through volume or force. It was gravity. The kind that pulls attention, timing, and responsibility toward one player without a word being spoken. Drills didn't revolve around her by design, they evolved that way because efficiency demanded it. And that's what made it uncomfortable. Because when the game starts choosing a direction on its own, it leaves little room for debate. Some players adjusted quickly, recognizing what was happening and flowing with it. Others felt the shift in a very different way. Because not everyone experienced that change as opportunity. Angel Reese didn't lose her place in any obvious way. There was no moment where a coach pulled her aside or a drill where her minutes suddenly disappeared. On the surface, everything looked the same. She ran the same sets, took the same reps, and stayed on the floor just like everyone else. But underneath that normalcy, something had shifted. The ball stopped finding her. Not intentionally, not as punishment, it just moved elsewhere. Possessions flowed in a new direction, guided by reads that favored speed and precision over force. Where Angel once felt central to the action, she now felt adjacent to it. Close enough to be involved, but not close enough to control anything. The rhythm of the game passed through her instead of settling in her hands. That's the hardest kind of change, to confront the one that doesn't announce itself. There were no mistakes to point to, no blown assignments to correct. Just a growing sense that the game was being played around her, not through her. An invisible demotion. No words, no explanation, just a quiet reordering of importance. You could see it in the pauses between plays, the extra second before moving into position, the glances that didn't come back her way. She wasn't frozen out, but she wasn't centered anymore either. And in a camp built on hierarchy, that difference matters. There was no confrontation, no outward frustration, just tension that hung in the air, unspoken but heavy. Angel kept competing, kept pushing, trying to reassert herself through effort and physicality. But the flow didn't bend back. It kept moving forward. And then came the scrimmage that erased all doubt. The scrimmage wasn't scheduled for drama. It was closed door by design. No cameras lining the baseline. No fans watching from the stands. Just coaches, players, and a scoreboard that didn't care about reputations. These are the moments teams value most because nothing is performed. Everything is revealed. Caitlin ran point. From the first possession, the game sped up. Not reckless, not rushed, just faster in a way that demanded attention. The ball didn't stick. It moved cleanly, snapping from side to side before defenses could settle. Reads came early. Cuts were rewarded instantly. The offense felt less like a collection of players and more like a single organism responding to her decisions. Angel tried to assert herself the way she always had, through contact, through strength, through presence in the paint. She fought for position, leaned into screens, pushed the pace physically. But the game didn't slow down to accommodate that. Possessions ended before force could bend them. By the time contact arrived, the advantage was already gone. That's the quiet cruelty of tempo. It doesn't argue with power, it bypasses it. Strength only matters if the ball arrives where you can use it. And in this scrimmage, the ball arrived where the system needed it, not where it had once lived. You could feel the separation growing with each trip down the floor. One side operating in rhythm, the other trying to disrupt it. Not because of effort, but because the game itself had chosen a direction. The sharper the movement became, the harder it was to impose anything else onto it. At that moment, this stopped being competition. That's when the room changed its posture. Coaches weren't reacting anymore, they were observing. You could see it in the small details. Quiet conversations on the sideline, assistants jotting things down between possessions, eyes tracking patterns instead of individual plays. This wasn't evaluation, it was recognition. Caitlin wasn't trying to prove she deserved a spot. That question had already been answered without discussion. What she was doing was something far more decisive. She was showing that the entire system functioned cleaner when it ran through her. Decisions came faster. Spacing stayed intact. Mistakes didn't disappear, but they became manageable. The game looked simpler, even at full speed. That's when competition ends and hierarchy begins. Angel felt it before anyone said a word. You don't need a whistle for that kind of realization. You feel it in the way instructions stop coming your way, in how the flow no longer bends to your presence, in how the next adjustment doesn't include you at the center of it. The room didn't turn against her, it just moved past her. There was no argument to be had, no play to challenge, no moment to protest. The clarity was undeniable, and that made it harder to resist. This wasn't about effort or attitude, it was about fit, about direction, about which version of the game coaches could trust when the margin for error disappeared. Hierarchy doesn't announce itself, it settles, quietly, permanently. And once it does, everything else starts to feel unstable. Because clarity, when it arrives too suddenly, can feel a lot like panic. The final day didn't feel tense. It felt stripped. The gym was quieter than it had been all week, not because people were relaxed, but because there was nothing left to debate. Conversations were short. Instructions were minimal. Everyone understood that this wasn't about experimentation anymore. It was about execution. And the execution was ruthless. Every drill moved with purpose. Every possession had a clear outcome. Caitlin directed traffic like someone who had been running this group for years, not days. She called actions, early adjusted spacing on the fly, and delivered the ball exactly where teammates needed it, not where they expected it. That difference mattered. Some players adapted immediately. Others hesitated, caught off guard by how quickly decisions were made. You could see it in the timing. Passes arrived before hands were ready. Cuts opened space that wasn't anticipated. The pace demanded trust, and not everyone had caught up to it yet. Caitlin wasn't overpowering anyone. She was operating 2 steps ahead, and that gap exposed everything. Angel was still on the floor, still competing, still involved, but the ball barely found her. Not because she was excluded, and not because she was benched. She was simply no longer part of the primary read. Possessions flowed around her, not through her. The offense didn't stop for her presence, and it didn't wait for her rhythm to return. That's the most uncomfortable place to be active, but peripheral. Useful, but not essential. As the final drills wrapped and the last possessions played out, there was no confusion left in the room. By the time the whistle blew, the decision was already made. The exit didn't come with warning. There were no raised voices, no emotional outburst, no moment for anyone to step in and stop it. Angel didn't wait for announcements. She didn't stay for meetings. She stepped away before any of that could happen, and the timing of it made the message impossible to miss. The gym froze. Coaches looked at each other instead of after her. Players suddenly found reasons to focus on anything else. No one chased her down. No one asked questions out loud. Because everyone in that room understood what the walkout meant. It wasn't frustration in the heat of competition. It was a decision made after clarity had already settled. Silence filled the space she left behind. And that silence spoke louder than any confrontation could have. If there had been shouting, it could have been dismissed as emotion. If there had been a scene, it could have been reframed as conflict. But there was none of that. Just a quiet departure that carried weight precisely because it refused to explain itself. In environments like this, exits don't happen by accident. They happen when a player realizes the direction has already been chosen. Angel didn't argue it. She didn't fight the current. She recognized it and removed herself from it. That kind of understanding is unsettling, especially when it arrives without closure. The room didn't erupt after she left. It stayed calm, too calm. And that calm confirmed what everyone already felt but hadn't said. But what happened after camp was even louder. What happened inside the gym didn't stay there for long. Once camp ended, the shift became impossible to ignore. Highlights started circulating almost immediately. Clips that hadn't been pushed before suddenly led timelines. Media outlets that once framed Caitlin Clark as a question mark now treated her as a solution. The tone didn't evolve, slowly it flipped. Overnight, the narrative changed. The same league that had hesitated to fully embrace her began promoting her presence as inevitable. Analysts adjusted their language. Coverage softened where it once resisted. What had been debated quietly behind closed doors was now being presented as obvious, as if it had always been headed this way. Caitlin never addressed it. No quotes, no statements, no victory lap. She didn't explain the shift or acknowledge the reversal, and that silence only strengthened the message. Her power didn't come from headlines or validation. It came from what had already been seen by the people who mattered most. That's the uncomfortable part. When influence becomes undeniable, it no longer needs defense. The league didn't change its mind because of public pressure. It changed because the internal truth became too clear to ignore. Once that happens, everything else follows marketing messaging momentum. Meanwhile, the absence left behind at camp lingered. It wasn't discussed openly, but it was felt. The contrast between who was being elevated and who had stepped away sharpened the story without anyone having to spell it out. And that's what made this moment so revealing. No press conference announced the shift. No official explanation confirmed it, which brings us to the part nobody wants to admit. This wasn't drama. It just looked like it from the outside. Inside that gym, what happened was something far more familiar to anyone who's ever played at a high level. Basketball made a decision, quietly, efficiently, without needing permission. Caitlin Clark didn't demand control. She didn't ask for the offense to run through her. She didn't make statements or push narratives. The system chose her because it worked better that way. The reads were cleaner, the pace sharper, the margin for error smaller. When that happens, there's nothing left to argue. And Angel Reese didn't fail. This wasn't a collapse or a disappearance. It was a shift in direction. A moment where the game moved toward a version that no longer needed what she brought at its center. That's not judgment, it's reality. At this level, fit matters as much as talent, sometimes more. What made this moment uncomfortable wasn't conflict, it was clarity. The kind that arrives without warning and leaves no room for interpretation. One player became essential, another recognized she wasn't anymore. And that's the part people struggle to accept. Because once a system reveals who it trusts under pressure, it rarely looks back. So the question lingers long after camp ends when the game makes its choice. Can anything actually pull it back?